Blacke by Reagan Roth, narrated by Jamie Cutler, and distributed by Beacon Audiobooks, copyright 2018. Chapter 1. The words move across the page like a bulleting train heading east, row by row, line after line, one sentence and then another. He's working on his new masterpiece, All Roads Lead to Damascus. Already projected a bestseller by the likes of such prestigious newspapers as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today, to simply name a few. The man turns, and there, standing behind him all smiles, the girl with the autumn fire hair. Why would she be smiling? Why? After all that has happened to her in this demented world, this wretched town called Damascus. No one really knows, this heart of man, the evil within, eating and stripping one's soul of their past premonitions without any cause, leaving a blackened void of ill-willed deceit. The fear rises in the pit of his stomach as the girl, all smiles, continues to arouse his persistent curiosity. He opens his mouth to speak. Nothing. She turns away from him and then calmly says these words beneath her breath. You never should have. The loud, thunderous clang of bronze meeting ancient oak disrupts his thoughts. The man stops typing on his antique typewriter, a family heirloom passed through generations. It is his favorite keepsake, the crisp keys whiter than any he'd seen before, capped with a perfectly thick layer of enhanced ivory. It is his favorite device for putting words to pages. Forget the computer. He cocks his head in the direction of the mansion's vast foyer, something he likes to call the great passageway leading to the many doors of his realm. What time is it? He thinks, lifting his fingers from the keys for the first time in hours. I know I left the gates open for some reason, just can't remember why. He stretches his hands wide as if he were ready to crush someone's skull. He then leans back in his medieval throne, another pet name for something a little less dramatic, although his writing chair is rather overwhelming, with its black-lined crushed red velvet and its jewel-encrusted wooden arms and legs. Throwing his arms into the air like a prophet beckoning to the gods, he rocks forward out of the throne and stands. For the second time, the banging on the front door startles him. I'm coming. Leaving his octagon-shaped office on the west wing of the mansion, the man heads through a door to the northern part of the house before turning to his right down a long, narrow hallway, lined with glass-cased shelves, dust-free, carrying shadow box-themed memoirs and his lifetime of writing accolades. These memoirs, unlike the East Wing, carry only his past and not his family's. This hallway, although notoriously long day or night, seemingly grows and haunts as the hour passes, and the light from the west window shines no more. But daylight has just begun, as scattered strands of the sun's beams portray a shadow on the wooden planked floor before the traveling writer. It wasn't too long ago when this constricted hallway echoed with a child's laughter, but that's just a faded memory of what was, and what will never be again. The knocking occurs a third time. The man shakes his head as he comes to another door at the end of the hall. A little patience, my persistent friend. This door opens into the great passageway, and the man turns to his right again and proceeds to the front of the luxurious mansion. He arrives at the main entrance, which towers above any 6-foot person, with heavy oak double doors and a half-circle finish at the peak. One might think there would be a portcullis and a moat waiting outside. He raises the rustic iron latch, drawing free the lock, and then tugs on the circular brass handle, appearing like a bull's nostril ring, fastened to the door to his right and the visitor's left. The door slowly cracks open, revealing new light in the mansion's foyer. Before the writer stands a nervous-looking fellow with a pen in one hand and a clipboard full of papers in the other. A reflecting piece of a silver recorder exposes itself at the top of his tan sports jacket chest pocket. Sweat beads on his balding head, running down his forehead and into his beady eyes behind his perfectly round rimmed glasses. "Mr. Blacke?" the shaky visitor asks, dabbing his face with his striped tie. He scratches a small spot of hair along the side of his scalp, directly behind his right ear. He smiles, but it's not a confident one. "That's me," Mr. Black answers, shrugging his shoulders and exposing the palms of his hands as to say, "I'm harmless." Mr. Black raises one eyebrow and waits for the suited man to get on with it. The man squirms beneath his own fear of meeting someone idolized, but also someone who has been deemed rather different. "I don't mean to bother you or, take much of your time, sir, but if you could answer a few quick questions?" The man basically interrupts himself, taking a deep breath and starting over again. "Excuse me, let me introduce myself. My name is Ray Spencer." He extends his hand through the magical opening separating the outside world from Mr. Black's domain and finishes by saying, "I'm new with the Lago Diablo News, and I know we haven't truly met here in town, but it's an absolute honor to meet such a distinguished and great writer. You want to come inside, suck it a little more, buddy?" "I'm flattered, Mr. Spencer." Mr. Black chooses the second response, even though his initial thoughts were quite funny and tempting. He smiles more at his own humor inside his mind than from meeting this Ray Spencer fellow. But regardless of the realism behind it, the easing gesture seems to slightly calm the reporter maybe? "You wanted to ask a few questions? Come inside." Mr. Black steps aside of the doorway and motions for the fellow from the Lago Diablo News to enter. He closes the heavy door, shutting out the sun and leaving only trickles of the color-changing light spectrum to warp its way in, near the 20-foot ceiling via small, decorative windows. "This is more than I could have ever imagined," Spencer adds, nearly breaking his neck as he scans the cathedral ceiling and majestic artwork hanging from the high walls. "All right, maybe I'll just put the tip in." Mr. Black smiles behind his guest, always able to entertain himself when others can't quite get it done. He begins to pat the fellow on the back, but then thinks better of it. Don't want to conjure up any more visions than necessary. Don't want to extend a warm hand where a friendship would be lacking. He takes the lead, heading to the end of the great passageway and passing many doors to his left and right. Before reaching that end, they pass a twisting staircase, each individual step tiled with a sheet of solid marble that travels straight up to a dark hole cut out of a recessed ceiling lower than the initial domed covering. Once arriving at the back of the incredible foyer, another set of double doors await, smaller and less intimidating, but standing out in a contrasting and magnificent manner nonetheless. These doors are glowing white, almost whiter than white. They stand alone at the finish to the intentionally dark foyer, bringing about some sort of soothing escape from when one might have thought there wasn't any. The entryway itself is dark, along with most of its satirical, ancient religious paintings, and then the colors in the room, also shadowy. But there, leading into the grand dining room, is an ironic transition. Turning both silver handles and simultaneously pushing both doors open, Mr. Black says, "Voila!" Speechless, Ray Spencer's eyes readjust to the bright light, dazzling through at least a dozen vertically long pane windows. Before the window, a banquet-sized table engulfs the room, capable of seating more than 20 people. The craziest part about the dining table is that it appears to be one piece. How the hell did someone get that thing in here? The reporter thinks, as though Mr. Black was reading his mind. Got that table in Wales, has some sort of ties with Robert the Bruce, but I'm not entirely sure which one or the actual story behind it. Anyways, when I built this house in '96, I had the floors put in this room before the walls, and then the table was put in, and then they built the walls and windows. Mr. Black circles and motions all around him. And everything else around the table? It cost me more than I made on my last novel to get it shipped here from Europe in one piece, and then put it in its resting place. Amazing! The only word that comes to the reporter's mind. That it is, Mr. Black responds, motioning for his guest to take a seat. The chairs were also composed entirely of wood, although they boasted sealed cedar, a more local find. Before the interview for the Lago Diablo News, the small circuited newspaper covering the 2,286 that populate the town and several other smaller surrounding towns including Redstone, Wickerton, Monteville, and Incarnate begins, Mr. Blacke provides further background to the monumental dining table. He tells the reporter that the wood used for the table is birch, which is, at least Mr. Blacke was told, the most common tree in Scotland. Somehow or another, the giant table was transported from Scotland by someone with ties to royal blood to Wales as a gift. For whom the gift was given or received by, nobody exactly knew, but it was enough history to make the table itself worth millions. 2 million to be exact, and then another 700 grand shipping it across the Atlantic, but that was chump change for Mr. Blacke, who not only made millions with his ability to make words turn to life, but was also one of the largest shareholders and percent owners of a major oil and fuel company called Simmons Inc., not to mention the other money, cash, resting beneath a trap door in the East Wing's octagon playroom. The actual interview began. "Mr. Blacke, as I told you before," Spencer says, pressing record on the silver tape recorder now resting on the coated birch. With pen in hand and a clipboard full of notes laying in front of him, also for jotting down new information, he continues. "The Lago Diablo News would love to get some of your thoughts and, inspiration behind the new novel, or as you've referred to it in the Times, the new masterpiece. I'm hoping that since we are your local newspaper," Mr. Blacke stands, leaving the head of one end of the table, and walks to the other end. He picks up a newspaper, Lago Diablo News, and waves it back at Spencer, who hasn't said a word since Mr. Blacke got out of his chair. The reporter laughs, not entirely sure what's amusing, but as an instinctive reaction. Mr. Blacke comes back to the interviewing end of the table, careful not to bump his head on the side of the golden, dimly lit chandelier, with sparkling crystals dangling above and slightly hanging over each side of the centerpiece below it. The expensive decor reminds the author of a red deer's antlers hanging upside down, but with full tines and captivating horned cups at the crest. "Just wanted to let you know I was a reader," Mr. Blacke says, referring to the newspaper as he returned to his seat. "And we appreciate that, sir," Spencer replies, still not understanding the reasoning behind Blacke's peculiar ways. Mr. Blacke rubs his chin with one elbow on the table. He waits for the reporter to commence with the questioning, but as soon as Ray Spencer opens his mouth to talk again, Mr. Blacke rises out of his chair, pushing it backwards, and asks, "Coffee?" He makes an apologetic hand gesture as the reporter responds with a "no thank you." He turns toward the west side of the mansion and walks a few steps to a swinging bar door, something that could have been the entryway into the OK Corral. The doors spray open with a gentle push, and Mr. Blacke turns back around, visible from the neck up and from the shins down. "Sorry, 1 second, I need some coffee." He disappears behind the wall. Spencer sits in disbelief, not sure whether to take the interruption as something rude or something rather silly. He patiently waits, staring out the perfectly rowed windows, flawless in both design and picturesque view.